So Congresswoman Scholten, welcome. We're so glad to have you with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to you for some opening comments, and then we'll turn it over to Congressman Lawler and we'll ask some questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you to this esteemed panel. One of my top priorities in Congress is supporting the next generation. And I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see such engaged young people here today focusing on such an important issue like bipartisanship. Bipartisanship is in my bones. It's what I have been doing my entire career. Growing up in West Michigan, a pretty conservative part of the country, I was not born and raised a Democrat. In fact, I didn't know a Democrat until I was a senior in high school. And I remember thinking, you are allowed to do that here? I did not know, do we have to get special permission from Synod? That's the overarching church hierarchical body. West Michigan is changing. This is Gerald Ford's old seat. And, we're continuing to see not only a change in the population here, as we see so many new people moving to the district, people with Democratic affiliations moving in, but and I say this with an asterisk that this is not all Republicans, but there is an extremism that is taking over, I think to a certain extent in both parties, but that some folks have seen in the Republican Party that has made them think, maybe this is not the party for me anymore. I think people like Congressman Lawler are doing a lot to change that and give the Republican Party the great name that it's always had and the spirit of working together. But we've seen people just reach out to our office and be attracted to the type of representation that I campaigned on and that I'm trying to bring to Congress, which is putting party affiliation aside and focusing just on the issues that matter. For me, that's two of my committee assignments, which is transportation and infrastructure needs. West Michigan is a booming area. The state of Michigan as a whole actually is losing population growth, but we are continuing to add population in the western part of the state. That has some unique transportation and infrastructure needs, small businesses and the economy. And as I mentioned before, supporting the next generation. These are my top three policy initiatives, which find a lot of common ground across the aisle. Congressman Lawler and I have already connected a number of times, and we've got a lot of great things that I know we're hoping to work on. I made a strong showing of my commitment to bipartisanship during the State of the Union. I joined with my fellow Congressman John James, a Republican from the east side of the state, literally crossed the aisle, and I sat on the Republican side that night to make a strong showing of demonstration how committed I am to this issue. It's an honor to be here with you today.
Well, thank you. And we're so glad to have you. And we love the tweet that you sent out the night of the State of the Union with Congressman John James. That was a great showing of bipartisanship. And Congressman Lawler, we'd love to have you jump in and make a few comments too.
Well, let me say thank you for hosting us and having this conversation. I'm looking forward to the discussion with our panelists. And with Hillary. And Hillary, let me just say you're always welcome to cross the aisle and come to the Republican side. But Hillary and I have actually talked quite a bit, going back to, I think, the first day of orientation. We connected, and certainly looking forward to working with her in the 118th Congress. I think there are a lot of areas where we can work together, including on immigration, which we've begun those discussions, and how we can really find some middle ground there, because I think everybody, regardless of your perspective, agrees that what's happening is just not working, and we need to make change and really bring about a process that is fair and that works for all those involved. And as the husband of an immigrant who came here to the United States about a decade ago and became a citizen 2 years ago, that is an issue that is of importance to me on a personal level. But I'm born and raised in Rockland County, just north of New York City. As Kathy mentioned in the intro, I served in the state legislature for 2 years. I first got my start in politics working for John McCain back in 2008 as an intern on his presidential campaign. And that really, piqued my interest in politics and government. I went to school for accounting and finance, so certainly didn't have that, poli-sci background, but it was something that, has served me well in politics and government. But, once I got engaged, I really enjoyed it and enjoyed being part of the fight and being in the arena, as Teddy Roosevelt famously said. And so, running for office this past November for Congress was a big decision, but the opportunity was there, and I really felt that in many respects I was uniquely positioned to win a district that Joe Biden won by 10 points. And I'm sure Hillary feels much the same way about her district, which is frankly, I don't think you could find two better people to have this conversation with. Hillary representing a district that Republicans have traditionally won, and me representing a district that Democrats have traditionally won. That's home to Bill and Hillary Clinton and George Soros. Certainly not, household Republican names there, but I think there's a real opportunity, and frankly, I think among many of us freshmen, especially, a real willingness to kind of put party difference aside and find area of commonality and a willingness to work together, because I think we all acknowledge that our country is just at a very difficult point right now, very divided politically. And we need people who are willing to kind of put those differences aside. You're not always going to agree. That's okay. That's a good thing. That's part of democracy. But to find a willingness to work together and not always assume the worst about somebody just because you disagree with them. I think that's a big part of the problem that we're facing. Everybody's so quick to ascribe an adjective to somebody the moment you disagree with them about an issue, instead of trying to find out why you disagree and how to bridge that divide. And so, I'm really looking forward to working with Hillary and others in our freshman class, especially, who frankly are not jaded by Washington, and hopefully won't ever be. But really finding a willingness to work together. And so I think this is a great conversation to have, and especially with our young folks, who want to be part of the process and want to be part of finding solutions for the future.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. It's really inspiring to hear y'all talking about working together on issues. And I'm going to turn it over to Janine, who I know has got a few questions, and then we'll go to the students.
Yes. Hello. Wonderful that you're both on here. This is a day I've been dreaming about, to actually have a Democrat and a Republican on our show to talk about issues. So this is very, very exciting. And aren't you both brave? This is what Americans really want to see. And I know that they're the fringes that feel, oh gosh, the radical, and I know there are differences of things we want to get done, but I founded Constituting America maybe 13 years ago, President's Day, and I've written essays on all the Federalist papers, and this is sort of even though I'm an actress, it's my wheelhouse. And I harken back to George Washington in his farewell address, saying that the party system would be the demise of America. I'm paraphrasing, because people care more about their party than about being an American. And I think Americans are really feeling that in the middle, in the heartland, not the radical right and left, because I can tell you, I live in Texas or New York City, but I'm a Texan and I have a ranch, and I consider myself sort of a middle America perspective. But I often just want the truth. I don't want the spin. I just want the truth. And with what's been happening with everything being shot down in the sky and things of that nature, I'm still hearing a little bit of spin. And I'm like, guys, we don't want to hear spin. We just want to hear the truth. Just tell us the truth. And I would like to know, whoever would like to go first is fine, but it must be hard for y'all as well to know that you need to defend your constituents, provide for your constituents, represent your constituents, but finding that kernel of truth in the situation without the spin. You're rising generations, and and it's such a spin factory up there. I would like to hear you, both of you, talk about how are you going to try to appease your party, but also find that common ground of America, and just the basic truth of the situation. We just want the truth. And then the second follow-up question I would have is, where are y'all working together? I know you've mentioned the one area. Are there any other areas where you're finding common ground? And thank you again so much. I'll let whoever jumps in go first.
Hillary, I'll defer to you.
Well, I love that you asked this question. So actually, journalism is the family business. My father was a journalist. My husband is a journalist, is journalism professor now. And neither as a young woman growing up or now today having to have conversations with my husband was I ever let off with easy answers or spin. So getting to the heart of the matter is what I try to do every single day. And I think it's what our constituents deserve. And, you're absolutely right, Janine. It is so difficult to push past the noise and the spin all the time. But I find that getting down to the truth is where the beginnings of bipartisanship can happen. Because when you push past the spin, we find that there is so much more room for common ground. There have been a number of issues already where I have crossed over and voted with Republicans. Creation of the China Commission, for example. A number of my Democrats were apoplectic about that idea, and all the spin we had to listen to. And I just sat there thinking, wait a second, this is a really good idea because we need the truth about what is happening with Chinese competitiveness. Now, especially, I think everyone is realizing how important it is that we have this specific commission dedicated to examining, China's rising role, our relationship with China, and how we're going to address those economic and national security threats. So, in response to your question, how do we get down to it? I think it's it's almost a chicken and the egg question. Do we start by suspending any of our misgivings about each other? I liked what Mike was saying about, not just assigning an adjective or assuming something about the other party. Or do we have to have the truth first? And I think it comes from within us to be willing to push past that and get down to looking at the truth of an issue. And China Commission is a great example.
So I agree with what Hillary was saying, and look, part of the reason I think both of us were successful in our districts is because we've both been able to appeal to a much broader swath of the electorate, and that people felt that we were both reasonable and people who were serious about the task at hand and willing to engage beyond just our partisan corners. And I think it certainly has served us both well in this past election, winning the seats that we did. But I think it was also a rejection by the voters of extremism, and a rejection by the voters, regardless of party, of people who are not dealing in facts or reality. And so I think when you look at to your first question, I very much am interested in facts, in evidence, in truth, and making decisions based on that. And so as a member of the state legislature, I had among the most bipartisan voting records in Albany. And the reason was I would look at every bill as it came, and not just the macro view of the issue from the standpoint of the party, but the actual specifics of the bill, what it would do, and how it impacted my constituents. And I think that, for me, is how I've tried to legislate. It's how I've tried to govern. As a member of the state legislature, I would debate. I was one of the members that would debate the bills and really ask questions of my Democratic colleagues in the majority and push back. But then I would go sit down next to them and talk about it after the debate, or sometimes before the debate, because it was never personal. We were there to do a job, and we're there to legislate. I'm not looking to embarrass anybody, but I'm looking to get to the truth. And so, and make people think, and hopefully improve the bill by engaging in a serious dialogue. And I think, so far, Washington's a little different the way it operates from a state legislature, especially when it comes to debate and discussion of bills. But I think there has been already, despite what people may think, there's already been bipartisanship on a number of issues. Hillary highlighted one of them with China. I think there is a lot of consensus among Democrats and Republicans that China is our greatest geopolitical foe, and that we need to take them serious, and no more so than seeing the spy balloon traverse the United States just a few weeks ago. So that I think there's a realization, and that was one of the big reasons why Speaker McCarthy wanted to move forward with that select committee. And I think Democrats and Republicans can agree on that. And, immigration obviously being an area, the fentanyl crisis and opioid crisis that we're dealing with, that's not partisan. This is impacting everybody. So I think there are so many more areas of agreement, and at least areas that we can work together and find compromise and solutions than people realize. I think the media obviously hypes up the differences, and so do the political parties and the politicians, because it motivates people, it drives people. It's easy to fundraise off that. Saying, "Oh, I agree with Hillary on this," is not exactly going to raise money necessarily. But there's a reason why people focus on the negative. But I really do think there's a lot more area to work together than people realize.
Well, our founding fathers would be proud of both of you. and I think about, in closing here, I'm going to toss it to Tova. We wouldn't be here as a country if everyone hadn't seen the bigger picture, and fought for truth and principle. But here's the other thing: they still argued, they still debated. They still have arguments on the floor, and Americans are sort of like, oh, we can tear each other apart out here, but on the floor they can't possibly argue. And on the floor, it's important to have debate. And I was thrilled to be able to see it during the election of McCarthy. I mean, it's like, wow, I get to actually see how this works. But they argued, our founding fathers, but they understood what unity meant for the bigger cause of America, and that's with that, whether it was the Declaration of Independence, winning the war, no one knew that better than George Washington, and then the United States Constitution. So finding that common ground and just preserving America and America's principles is vastly important. And I actually think that the polls about the Congress would go way up, if we could see more of this, because it's just, and I'm going to move on to Tova, but it's just a sigh of relief to go, oh my gosh, okay, we're finding common ground. We're thinking about higher principles and the truth and how we come together to save this country. And we wouldn't be here if our founding fathers hadn't figured that out. But I'm going to die. I'm going to toss. Yeah,
if I could make one,
toss to Tova. Yes, go ahead, really quickly.
I just want to make one quick comment on that. Obviously the speaker vote was historic and certainly entertaining for some, but and and I fully supported Kevin McCarthy for speaker and fought to make sure that, everybody stayed unified behind him throughout that process. But in reality, I think the rules changes that were enacted really actually help for more debate and more participation by individual members to offer amendments, to really be, bringing back an open rule process, and allow for debate and exchange of ideas. And yes, there'll be partisanship within that, but the truth is, that's what legislating should be. That we should have those free exchange of ideas. It shouldn't all be so scripted where it just comes to the floor and it passes unanimously, or it passes on a party line vote and then we move on. There should be robust debate. And you know what? People raise good points when you actually allow for debate. And sometimes things you didn't think of and you go, oh, well, yeah, they're right. And maybe you figure out a way to address that within the bill. So that doesn't happen unless you have robust debate.
Yes, I agree with that.
I want to just say
Congress-
too, I completely agree with that portion of the rules change, and it's historic that we had that for the very first time. And I will note too, one of the biggest criticisms of it was efficiency. And credit to where credit is due. What'd we do? 134 amendments, Mike, in like 2 hours.
Yep.
I mean, just really, it was breakneck speed. But if you have a good team, you're organized ahead of time. You know exactly what the amendments are about, and it was a robust and engaged, and I will say efficient process. So I'm all for it.
Great.
Great. Okay, y'all rock. Okay, turning it over to Tova. Thank you so much.
All right, this has been a really fascinating discussion so far. And just to get a little deeper into the subject of bipartisanship, I'm curious, how do you think your constituents view the idea of bipartisanship? Do you think most of your constituents share your commitment to bipartisanship? And if so, why do you think so many politicians still cater to partisanship if most people want bipartisanship? And if you think most people, maybe don't want bipartisanship, like, for example, it's been reported that there's a lot of polarization in our country, especially with social media. People are increasingly moving apart. Why, if you think that's the case, if you agree with that idea of the state of things, why do you still think you should be committed to bipartisanship?
So I would say gerrymandering has a lot to do with it. Most of the districts in Congress and in state legislatures across the country are gerrymandered to one party or the other. So there's only a handful of districts that are truly competitive. Hillary's district and my district are two of those districts that are competitive. They're districts that, lean one way or the other, but obviously a member of the other party could win it with the right message and running a strong campaign. And so I think part of the problem is if more people had to run in districts like ours, you would have less partisanship, because people have to appeal to the middle and to the other party to win, to get the 50+1%. So I've won in a 2-to-1 Democratic district for assembly. I've won in this congressional seat that has 70,000 more Democrats than Republicans. And I did so by reaching out, by showing up everywhere, by going into every community, talking to every ethnic community, every religious community, really laying out my positions. I didn't change my position on anything. I just laid them out for people to understand. And I talked about issues that cut across party line. So if your focus is on issues that cut across party line, affordability, public safety, immigration, education, energy policy, those are issues that impact everybody, then you're more likely to build consensus. And that's what I was able to do in my race. And so I think, honestly, if we had more districts that were competitive, you would find a lot less partisanship and a lot more willingness to find the middle ground, because that's what voters want. And I think broadly, and I'll finish on this so Hillary can jump in, but broadly speaking, I think most voters want things to get done. They want to see accomplishments. They want to see the country moving forward. Most people are reasonable. They understand they're not going to get everything they want. That just doesn't happen in a democracy. So you have to be willing to give and take. I think anybody who's married understands you got to be willing to give and take. And so there's no reason why in our politics we shouldn't be able to get there. And I think in my district, yes, many of the people that supported me want to see certain policies enacted, but they want to see progress and they want to know that I'm fighting for them and moving the ball forward.
I think Mike and I have just found a new area of agreement, which is the betterment of our democracy depends on more districts like ours, where folks are not only, I couldn't agree with Mike more, forced to campaign in such a way, where you have to talk across party lines, but in order to maintain that seat, you have to be an engaged and responsive representative. Why Mike was such an effective legislator at the state level, and why we are making a huge effort in this first month to not only reach out to the people who voted for us and supported us, but those who didn't, to make sure that we're hearing their voices and that it's reflected in my leadership as well. I think there certainly are those who, they're so entrenched in their party lines that maybe they sort of get, turn their nose up at the idea of partisanship. But I think Mike is exactly right. Most people just want to get the work done. They're not thinking about Republican or Democrat. They're thinking about whether or not they can pay their bills. A great example of this, I went to visit a small auto parts manufacturer earlier in one of my district work periods, and they're embedded in a community where there's a lot of change and a lot of violence and a lot of bad stuff happening around this manufacturing plant. And the manager was talking to me about it, and he said, I was asking him, how do you deal with that? And he said, when we turn these machines up to 10 and really crank up the productivity, it really drowns out the noise out there. And I said, you know what? That is a great analogy. I'm taking that back to Congress with me. We're just going to crank up the productivity and tune out the noise outside and get to work.
I love that. Yes, I'm going to use that too. And then on this, a similar note, I remember learning about, like, in one of my, political science classes, about the idea of a delegate versus a trustee model of leadership. Whereas, like, the delegate model is you're just supposed to, like, represent what you think, what your constituents want. Whereas the trustee model is more like you're in Congress to use your own convictions and do policies that you believe in, even when that might sometimes diverge with what your constituents want. So I'm curious, how do you sort of conceptualize yourself within that framework? And as a congressperson, how do you balance your personal convictions versus, what your constituents want, especially in the realm of bipartisanship?
Hillary?
I think it's pretty simple. I did not run because of my personal convictions. I'm not running to implement, Hillary Scholten's agenda in Congress. This is about the people of West Michigan and what they want. And at the same time, what I'm championing certainly is a reflection of my own values. I knew that I would be a strong representative for this district because, I still have these conversations with my father, my uncle, members of my family that, for whom I had to have a literal come to Jesus conversation when I decided to run as a Democrat. So this is not theoretical. This is everyday, Sunday conversations after church. And so, I bring my personal self to my representation, and it's easy to get into the minds of constituents that don't always think like me, and to keep my mind open to new perspectives and possibilities as well. But I think it's so important to remember what it means to be a representative, a reflection of the people, and not to implement your own agenda. And if you stop listening to the people, then you fail as a representative.
So along the lines of what Hillary is saying, I mean, I think it's a combination of both. The trustee model certainly informs your views, if you will. We all have different life experiences, different backgrounds that shape our views, and you carry those with you. You don't, it's very hard to separate out, obviously, what you feel about something, especially if at your core, especially if it's a value, if it's a faith-based value or something. It's not easy necessarily to separate that out. But you have to take into account that you are there to represent a community, a constituency. You are not there just on your own accord. And so, as a member of the legislature in Albany and as a member now of Congress, I go meet with everybody. I show up to everything. I'll show up and people will be like, oh, why is he here? But you know what? They may not agree with me. They may not vote for me. They may not like me. But I think it's important for me to hear their concerns because I'm representing them too. And so I think that is important. And like, for instance, on LGBTQ issues, I have voted for a number of bills in the state legislature in support of the LGBTQ community. And I think it's important to vote your conscience and do what you think is right. Before my dad passed away a decade ago in March, the last thing he said to me was, to whom much is given, much is required, to always do God's work, and to love thy neighbor as thyself. And that has served me well in politics because I think it is important. You treat people the way you want to be treated, the golden rule, but you have to take that into account when you're making policy decisions. How does this decision impact people? Because that's what you're there to do. You're there to make decisions that impact the day-to-day lives of people. And so, you do the best you can. Sometimes your personal views will be a big part of your decision making. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes you'll make the decision purely based on, kind of the delegate model, as you said. So I think it's a combination of both, and you do your best to balance it.
Well, great. Thank you so much for your thoughtful answers. And I liked your point a lot about, you're not just representing the people who vote for you, but all the people in your district. And then my last question, just briefly, at Harvard, I got to have like a role in helping to plan the new members of Congress conference. So about 30 new members of Congress, before they assumed their roles, came to Harvard for a sort of training session, and it was bipartisan. And so it was very cool to get to see that. But that was before they assumed their new roles in Congress. So the suspense is killing me. What has it been like starting your new role as a member of Congress? What was sort of most surprising as you went from campaigning and wanting to be a member of Congress to actually getting to start?
I think the transition process has been really pretty good and quite smooth, actually. It's really jolting to go from being a candidate to being a member, especially someone who, like me, doesn't come from a legislative background, comes from, just an everyday career, Department of Justice attorney. There's really nothing like it. But we won the election. We didn't find out that I actually won until, the next day. And then 72 hours later, you're on a plane to Washington, D.C., and you're transitioning and you're getting everything set up. But, the House really has a fantastic program for getting individuals set up. And it's really in a lot of ways like setting up a small business where you are hiring staff, you're setting out your vision, your values, your goals, what you can accomplish in your first 30 days, your first 100 days, your first term, making sure that there's buy-in from various constituent groups. But I will say, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on here with Mike, but I'm so inspired by this freshman class. I think that, we've said it before, but there's a lot of hype around, some of the people who want to be in the news for being contrarian and the controversy, but I would say for the most part, it's a great group of people who are ready to work together. And the talent and experience is just humbling. I'm honored to be a part of this class. I think there's a lot we're going to be able to do.
Agree. And, the coming from a state legislature, especially in New York, where it could be a little rough and tumble, it certainly prepared me well. And I've been in politics and government for quite a while. So, that aspect of it, the transition was pretty seamless. I think, what is kind of on a really positive side of things, being able to go to the White House and meet the President of the United States, for a welcome reception for freshmen, sitting in the State of the Union and listening to the president speak. And, I've said this a few times over the last week, my wife being an immigrant and becoming a citizen, I brought her as my guest, and she got to sit and listen to the President of the United States deliver the State of the Union. And certainly, that was just a really wonderful experience on a personal level. Going to, meet with ambassadors, and I'm part Italian. So we went to the Italian embassy, ambassador's residence, and having dinner with Nancy Pelosi and Steve Scalise and Elise Stefanik. And, it was a very interesting evening in many respects. And I think you get thrown right into it. There's no like, oh, you're a freshman, go sit over there. I mean, you're thrown right into it. You're part of Congress. You're one of 435 members. And, and as Hillary said, it very much is like starting a small business, because you're your own boss. I mean, there is no, yes, you have leadership and you work with leadership, but you don't report to anybody. Nobody can tell you how to run your office or anything like that. You're on your own. In many respects. And so, that aspect of it, I think certainly the last thing I'd say is just your schedule is no longer your own. So to Hillary's point at the beginning about maximizing every minute, you really do have to, because you go from one thing to the next, starting at, 7:30 in the morning to 10 at night, pretty much every night, especially when you're in Washington.
Yes, I remember one of the sessions we were at, the key piece of advice was, if you want to spend time with your family, you have to schedule that in, because your scheduler will not do that if you don't ask them to. That's one thing that stuck out to me. But thank you so much for answering my questions and for being on and giving us a look into the whole process. So I will now pass on to Jewel and Jordan.
That's fantastic, Tova. I had the honor of attending an event with our former Republican congressman's widow, Karen Henry. Paul Henry was a longtime congressman from here, and she was sitting by me, my husband, and by me, and she said, I used to go into his calendar and schedule constituent piano recital, constituent baseball game for their kids. So yeah, I said I'm taking that one.
Definitely.
Hello, both of you, and thank you for your insight into bipartisanship. Is there anything in the party infrastructure which makes it difficult to accomplish things in a bipartisan way? And is there anything that you've run into and tried to work through?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the really unfortunate things, frankly, of Washington is it really is not set up to be bipartisan. There's very few opportunities for members across the aisle to really go to events together and do certain things together. You have to force it. You have to really invest the time and effort and energy to do that. Joining the Problem Solvers Caucus for one, and sometimes obviously events within industry, you'll see members from both parties. But it's not like a state legislature where we're all in the chamber at the same time and I could bounce around and talk to every single member in there. We're only there, generally speaking, all together when we're voting. And that's usually a rapid fire event. And then people are out of there and they're back to their office or to another meeting or to an event or to go do press. So you really have to start building those relationships. And so one of the things that I've tried to do to kind of work around the structural problems of Washington. It was really just, get cell phone numbers of individual members across the aisle, and reach out to them and try to find time to grab a cup of coffee, or, hey, let's sit and meet and talk about this issue, or, grab somebody as you're bumping into them on the floor and say, hey, I really want to work with you on this. We should talk about this. And I've done that with a number of members, including Hillary. We've started really exchanging. Robert Garcia and I did an interview on Face the Nation 2 weeks ago, and we've subsequently followed up and talked. And he's a progressive from California, and I'm not. So that obviously but there's opportunities to work together. And I think it's something where if you're committed to it, if you're serious about it, you'll make it work. And if you're not, you'll, allow Washington to operate the way that it does.
Yeah, I agree. And, I will just say, Mike is exactly right that there's not institutionally or structurally, a way to do that. But kudos to the organizations that make an effort to facilitate that for us. During the orientation period, we all stayed at the same hotel. And so that created a real opportunity for us to engage. Mike and I sat together at the National Press Foundation gala at a table that we were at just last week. And the Library of Congress puts on wonderful bipartisan events where individuals can go. But again, those are things that you have to avail yourself of. You have to make an effort for. And there are just fewer and fewer people in Congress that are willing and sometimes even able to make that kind of effort. So I think it would be great if there was more structural changes to force that and facilitate that.
The other one other comment I would make is just, sometimes what you try to do is find people who either have similar districts to you or neighboring districts. And so, my two neighboring districts, I'm surrounded by Democrats. I have Pat Ryan to the north of me. I have Jamal Bowman to the south of me. I have Josh Gottheimer to the west of me. And, Josh and I have already done multiple things together on SALT, on congestion pricing. We've held a press conference right across from the George Washington Bridge and got a lot of New York City and national press out of it. Pat Ryan and I have joined the SALT caucus together, and so there's a lot of opportunity, but you got to work at it, and you got to really start pushing early to forge those relationships.
And then just a quick one, are there any issues which you are like a political football, even generationally, where you just wish that even your own party, that you could probably get something done, and that that the American people are probably closer together on than your parties make it seem, and you're trying to navigate through it's kind of difficult to even get work done on because it's polarized?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've already, we've touched on a number of issues that I think are, really, we have a lot of opportunity for bipartisan work. Some perhaps are less controversial. We talked about the China Commission, but also, Congressman Lawler and I are already making steps to move forward on immigration work together. I think that is something that previously folks thought, oh, there's just no way in a closely divided Congress like this one, where Republicans have a narrow majority in the House, but Senate, Democratic controlled and Republican, and obviously in control of the White House. But I think that there's a lot of room for common ground. I've worked on immigration issues for close to 2 decades. And, I think a lot of people forget in the national conversation that immigration reform has been a Republican-led issue, really for the vast majority of this country. The last 3 major comprehensive immigration reforms we've had have been under Republican presidents. This is a humanitarian issue to be certain, but it's also an economic one. We're hamstringing our economy right now by not having an immigration system that's in step with the rest of the world, and it needs to be addressed. So I think there's a lot of agreement on that, and even the how we get there, there's a lot of agreement.
I agree 1,000% with Hillary. I think immigration is probably the best example where people think maybe the parties are so far apart on this and there's not an ability to get a deal there. I think people are so exasperated by the whole process and just the dysfunction within the system, and obviously the crisis at the border, the humanitarian crisis, human trafficking, drug trafficking, fentanyl obviously coming into our country and killing our citizens. So I think people on both sides, I think there's a lot of people willing to sit down and hopefully finally do something on this. It's been almost 40 years since Ronald Reagan signed the last major immigration reform. You look back to what George Bush tried to do in the 2000s, and the Gang of Eight, and there's been starts and stops, but the crisis is real, and I've talked to Democrats and they agree we got to do something about the border, and I've talked to Republicans and they agree we got to do something to deal with the undocumented, and we got to do something to deal with DACA, and we got to do something to fix the legal immigration system overall. So I think people are there. Of course there's going to be folks on both sides that do everything they can to stop any deal because they don't like this element of it or they don't like that element of it. I think both sides have to be willing to give. You're not going to get everything you want out of this. There's going to have to be border security, and there's also going to have to be legalization for those that are here undocumented. So we got to give. You're going to have to drill down on the details. There'll be a give and a take, and some people aren't going to like certain things, but they're going to have to give on it if we're going to get anywhere on this issue.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Jewel and Jordan, for such great questions. And Tova, thank you. And we're going to go to some audience questions real quick. First, we want to give a shout out to some of our students who are watching today. We have Hope Mucklow with homeschool students watching. And we have Kimberly Hammers with 103 high school students at Grassfield High School in Chesapeake, Virginia, who are watching. So we want to welcome all of Kimberly's students. And we have this podcast is playing live today at our booth at the Oklahoma Council of the Social Studies Conference in Tulsa. So we want to say hello to the Oklahoma Social Studies teachers that are stopping by our booth and watching today. Now, Mark Hill says, would be great to see both sides discuss immigration reform in a serious way. So he's encouraging of what you all just said, and our Sandy Thatcher had echoed that as well. And then Cindy Hoffman has asked, when you mentioned that when people go to the floor to vote, that's one of the times that they mix and mingle and see each other the most. Do the Republican members tend to stay on the Republican side, and do the Democrat members stay on the Democrat side, or is there a lot of mixing when the members are down on the floor?
I think there's a lot of mixing, but again, I think it depends on who the individuals are. I'm very eager to go mix and happy to go walk across the aisle and say hi to Maxine Waters or AOC or or Hillary or someone else. I mean, to me, it I guess depends in part on your personality and your willingness to engage. But I do think there's a lot of mixture, and a lot of people are extremely pleasant with each other, because the cameras aren't fully on, and they can't pick up everything you're saying. But I think when people let their guards down, a lot more people are willing to engage each other.
Yeah, I think it's again, you have to make an intention out of it. I have made this joke before, that I was predestined to be bipartisan, or this is God forcing me to be bipartisan, because when you vote, your name goes up on a board, a big highlighted board. And if I sit only on the Democratic side and cast my vote to make sure I voted the right way, there is a sconce on the wall that covers my name, and I have to go over to the Republican side to cast my vote and see it. There's only 2 names that get covered, and mine is one of them. So I cross over just to check that, and it forces me to mix and mingle. So.
And then Richard Mayberry asked about leadership in Congress. I mean, so often we see the leaders in Congress on news shows, and by virtue of their position, they have to be partisan. But behind the scenes, do you see the leadership? How much bipartisan outreach do you see going on with the leadership in Congress?
I think it's happening, as a freshman, even though I am a part of our freshman leadership class, we obviously don't have a direct window into that. But, I would say that I think the leadership is making every effort that they can, especially again, in such a closely divided Congress, we have to work together.
I think it depends on, like, for instance, the committees. Some of the committees are way more bipartisan than others. Oversight, probably not so bipartisan. Financial services and foreign affairs, which I'm on, tend to be more bipartisan. Foreign affairs, Greg Meeks and Michael McCall get along really well. And work together really well. We had no amendments to our rules for the committee the other day. Everything went swimmingly because they get along. And, I think, the main House leadership, look, it's a thankless job, frankly. Obviously there's power and prestige with it, but you're there to fight for your interests and your members and your party. And so sometimes I think, the leaders may be in a position where it's very difficult to kind of reach across the aisle. But I do think on some big issues they do. And I believe, Leader Jeffries and Speaker McCarthy are talking, maybe a little bit more, frankly, than Speaker Pelosi and Leader McCarthy were. But they seem to be engaging where appropriate and where necessary. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's always important for the leadership to be able to deal with each other and to try to find area of commonality and bipartisanship when you can, and they should.
Well, thank you. And we're right at the top of the hour, and we know you all both have very busy schedules, so we don't want to keep you. We want to thank you so much for being with us today. It was enlightening and encouraging and inspiring. And Janine, would you like to make any closing comments before we go?
Well, I'll just say bravo. This was so exciting. You're the hope. You're the hope, like the students we have here and the graduates, the college graduates on our panel with us here. They're the hope of America as the rising generation, and you're the hope of America too. So thank you so much for being with us today, both of you. Well spoken, terrific Americans. It was just heartwarming and kind of like swimming through a warm ocean to hear both of you and to know that our world's going to be our country is going to be a better place. At least we have a lot of challenges coming up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Bye-bye.
We thank our audience and invite y'all next week. We're going to have a special episode on George Washington right before his birthday. We're going to have Admiral Peter Cressy on talking about George Washington's leadership skills and how President Washington united the country. So thank y'all.